We're using the red Sidurim, and they're on the table with the song sheets, because tomorrow obviously is Slichus, and next week we are in Rosh Hashanah mode. So we are preparing, and we have put the Machzorim out. We are starting the year very soon. We'll begin this evening with the Shalom Aleichem. It's in the Sidur, the red-covered Sidur, on page number 5. This is originally a greeting prayer song on page 5 that was sung, recited, reflected upon in the home, and some hundreds of years ago it migrated from the home into the synagogue because people liked it. The idea is that we are greeting angels. We must be very important if we have the authority to greet angels. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Ashoret, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlochim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mimelech, malachei hamlochim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlochim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlochim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On page number 10, in the Sidur, in the Red Prayer Book, on page 10, a song from the mystical tradition, from the Kabbalistic tradition, Yedi Nefesh, speaking of the soul that is within each and every one of us. And the soul is gravitating towards God. And as we are ushering in this special time, Shabbat, our soul becomes a bit more excited because it's getting closer to God, whatever that might mean. If you look at the stanza in Hebrew, you see that it begins with a yud, and the next stanza begins with a hey, and then the third stanza begins with a vav, and the fourth stanza begins with a hey. And those first 4 letters spell out God's name, which nobody knows how to pronounce. We treat it as Adonai, which means my Lord. Could we ever truly articulate God's name? But the soul, which is activated in the mere thought of or the presence of God, in a way, might be the writing of God's name, and each one of us bears a soul. The first 2 stanzas. Yedi nefesh avarachaman mishoch el ritzonach yarotz avdach כמו אייל ישתחווה כמו הדרך כי ירב לו ידידותך מנופת צוף וכל טעם הדור נאה זיו העולם נפשי חולת אהבתך אנה אלנה רפנה לך בהרות לה נעם זיווך אז תתחזק ותתרפא והייתה לך שפחת עולם ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די די ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די די ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 ידדי די די ידדי די 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 ידדי די 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 yada die 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 hey die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 yada die 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 die. L'chunaranana on page number 11. L'chunaranana l'Adonai nari al-etzur yishenu Nikadma fana b'torah bizmirot nariya lo Nikadma fana b'torah bizmirot nariya lo Ki el gadol Adonai umelech gadol al kol Elohim Asher biyado mekirei haaretz v'toafot harim lo Asher biyado mekirei haaretz v'toafot harim lo. On the facing page, let us go together and sing to Adonai. Let us trumpet praise to our protector. Filled with thanks, let us greet God, raising our voice in song. Great is Adonai, a greater sovereign than all other deities. God's hands formed the earth's deep. Mountain crests too are God's work. The sea is God's, for God made it. Dry land was fashioned by God's hands. Come then, let us bow and kneel. Let us bend our knees in the presence of Adonai, who formed us. For 40 years I was troubled by that generation, and I said, these are people whose hearts have gone astray. They do not know my way, so in anger I swore they would not enter my rest. Asher nishbati v'api im yavon el menuchati. On page 19, please. Adonai reigns, nations tremble. The one enthroned amidst the cherubim makes the world quake. Adonai is great in Zion, above all nations. They shall acknowledge your name, saying, Great, awe-inspiring Holy One. A sovereign strength lies in the love of justice. and you forged the paths of truth, judging Jacob righteously and justly. Exalt Adonai, our God. Bow down before God, the Holy One. On page 20. Moses and Aaron among God's priests, and Samuel among those who called upon the divine name, called to you and you answered them. You spoke to them from amidst the cloud. They kept your covenant and the law you gave them. You answered them, Adonai, our God. You were a forgiving God to them, even as you punished them for their transgressions. Exalt Adonai, our God, and bow down at God's holy mountain, for Adonai, our God, is holy. We begin with that presentation of Moses and Aaron and Samuel, and they are among God's leaders. Why introduce a reminder that Moses and Aaron famously sinned before God? Why introduce that in the psalm? Why not just continue skating on at a high point? Because no one is perfect. Even our greatest and grandest leaders, everyone has the capacity for falling, for failing, for erring. The question is, how do we see ourselves? Are we willing to stand up and start anew and start afresh? That's what I see in this psalm here in our Shabbat. If Moses and Aaron could stand up again, then we can too. Speaking of standing up and being in a place, we have some song sheets this evening. And one song sheet is entitled Holy Ground. We are in holy space right now because of time and because of location.
Every second, every minute, every hour, every day, everything, everyone, every place, every way, where you walk, where you stand, where you love, where you praise, all of life is holy ground. Every he, every she, every what, every who, it's in her, it's in them, it's in me, it's in you. In the bitter, in the sweet, in the calm, in the storm, all of life is holy ground. So walk as if it's holy ground. Breathe as if it's all around. Can make a holy sound. Take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. When you hurt, when you heal, when you laugh, when you pray, when you hold, when you keep, when you give it away, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, all of life is holy ground. So walk as if it's holy ground. Breathe as if it's all around. Talk and make a holy sound. We take our shoes off, we're on holy ground. We are one people, one story, one tapestry we weave, one journey, second, every minute, every hour, every day. Everything, everyone, every place, every way. Where you walk, where you stand, where you love, where you praise. All of life is holy ground. Can you feel the holy ground? Take your shoes off. You're on holy ground.
Page 21, Mizmor David. Page 21 in the Siddur. Page 21. Mizmor LeDavid, Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Havu l'Adonai, Kavod v'os, ay, Havu l'Adonai, Kevod Shemo, Ishtachavu l'Adonai, Barad Kodesh, Kol Adonai, Halamayim, El HaKavod, Hirim, Adonai, Almaim Rabim, Kol Adonai, Bakoach, ay, Kol Adonai, Behadar, Kol Adonai, Shaber Arazim, Vaishaber Adonai, Et Arzei Alvanon, Vayarkidem Kemo Egel, Levanon, Vesirion, Kemo, Venre'emim, Mayayay, Kol Adonai, Chotzev Lavotesh, Kol Adonai, Yachel Midbar, Yachel Adonai, Midbar Kadesh, Kol Adonai, Yachol Alayalot, Vayechesof, Yarot, Ovechalo, Klo Merkavot, ay, Adonai, Lama Bu Yashava Yeshev Adonai, Melech Leolam, Adonai, Oz Lamo Yiten Adonai, Yavarech, Et Amo Vashalom, And the Charudi on page 23, the first two stanzas, pardon me, and on page 25, the last two stanzas. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad, Ishme'anu el ham-yuchad, Adonai echad, U'shemo echad, L'shemo tiferet v'litila. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lekrat Shabbat lechuvenelcha, Ki mekor habaracha, Merosh mikedem nesucha, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Yamin osmo tifrotzi, V'et Adonai ta'aritzi, Al Yadish ben Partzi, V'nismecha ben Agila. We rise. Lecha dodi lekrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela, lechadodi lekrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Bo'e v'shalom ateret bala, gam besimcha uvetzahala, toch emonei am skula, bo'e chala, lechadodi lekrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela, lechadodi lekrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Remain standing. We rise symbolically because the poem, the song is calling out to the spirit of the Sabbath herself. And so our feet just lift us up. Our bodies respond to what we're saying, what we're seeing, what we're thinking about. We don't want to remain seated when Shabbat's entering the door. So we turn around symbolically. And now you know why here on page 27, the next selection in the prayer book is the psalm that's labeled the Psalm for Shabbat herself. Of the 150 psalms within the Bible, 7 are specifically identified with the days of the week. And this psalm has been labeled the Psalm for Shabbat well over 2,000 years, some opinions as much as 3,000 years. For 3,000 years, every Friday and every Saturday, Jewish people sang or recited or reflected upon or meditated upon this passage. And my eyes continue to turn to page 28. The last 2 stanzas, which is why we're still standing, because we're talking about ourselves through the lens of the prayer book. We're standing because we are righteous and we're flourishing. The righteous flourish like the date palm. They thrive like a cedar in Lebanon, planted in the house of Adonai. They flourish in our God's courtyards. In old age they remain fruitful, still fresh and bountiful, proclaiming, Adonai is upright, my rock in whom there is no flaw. The psalm for millennia asserts that you and I are righteous. And as a function of being righteous, we are planted in God's courtyard and we stand tall and strong like beautiful plants, beautiful trees. We are part of God's garden. Borchum on page 39b. And we are seated. The first blessing on page 39b. Baruch atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space. You completed your work of creation on the 7th day, calling this day from one evening to the next the holy Shabbat, and gave this day of rest and all its holiness to your people Israel, creator of day and night, rolling a light before darkness and darkness from light, making day pass and bringing on the evening, distinguishing day from night. Adonai Tzvaot is your name, living and ever-present God. May your rule be with us forever and ever. Baruch atah Adonai, who brings each evening's dusk. El chai v'kayam, tamidim lo choleinu l'moed. Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. On page 40, this introduces the Shema. Looking at the last two lines on the English side, you see the little red arrow beginning with, "Do not ever withdraw." And as we read this line, I ask you, what's the tone of this phrase? Do not ever withdraw your love from us. What does that sound like? Is it a request? Is it a plea? Is it a plea? In Hebrew, it's a command. Al tasir. We actually have the chutzpah to command God to continue to love us. On page 40. Ve'avatecha al tasir mimanu la'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev amo Yisrael. And before the Shema, the song sheet, Love Your God. Before the Shema, in a moment, on page 41 in the Siddur, but for now, the song sheet, Love Your God.
Love your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul. Love your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. Where you live, where you lie, where you stumble, where you thrive, with all you speak, with all you know, with all your soul. Be like God, one like God, in love and life. Be like God, love like God, with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. When you seek, when you soar, when you breathe and breathe no more, love your God, be with God, go with God. Be with God, one like God, go with God.
On page 41, the Shema. Shema Yisrael
et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvachol nafshecha uvachol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'aderech u'v'shachbecha v'kumecha u'keshartam la'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha uv'sharecha. Moment or two of silence, perhaps considering some of the meditations on page number 42. Adonai Elohechem emet. On page 44 on the English side. Then Moses, Miriam, and the people of Israel joyfully sang to you. Umalchuto b'ratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe u'Miriam u'vnei Yisrael lecha anu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam. Who is like you, Adonai, among the mighty? Who is like you, adorned in holiness, revered in praise, working wonders? Mi chamocha bo'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, norati lot osef eleh. Your children recognized your sovereignty as you split the sea before Moses. This is my God, they responded, and said, Adonai will reign forever and ever. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeh yam lifnei Moshe, zeli anu v'yamro, Adonai yimloch la'olam va'ed. And so it is written, Adonai has rescued Jacob and redeemed him from the hand of those more powerful than he. Baruch atah Adonai, who redeemed the people Israel. On page 45, on the English side, the bottom 5 lines of that little stanza with their little red arrow. Ensure our going and coming for life and peace, now and forever. May you spread over us your canopy of peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who spreads the canopy of peace over us, over all the people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, Baruch atah Adonai, Haporei sukat shalom aleinu, V'al kol amo Yisrael, V'al Yerushalayim. V'shamru at the top of page 46. V'shamro v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam. V'shamro v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam. Benu v'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamro v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz v'shamro v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamro v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, Yom v'chayechon v'yom echon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael bagala, bagala uv'izman kariv v'imero amen. Yeshmei Rabba mevorach L'olam l'yomei omaya yit Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitparvim v'yinasei v'yadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shemei dekudesha brechu leila mekamachata v'shirata tushbechata da'amiran b'omam We rise to the silent Amida, page 47 to 52, or an opportunity to offer a silent, private prayer of our own devising. A few moments of silence. Countdown. 1 week. 1 week and the whole universe changes. That's what Rosh Hashanah is. It's the birthday of the universe. And there's a paragraph that escorts a few of the blasts of the shofar. And it's Hayom Harat Olam. This is the birth of the universe. So when we think of Rosh Hashanah, we're not only speaking of our interplay against the background of a calendar, but we're seeing ourselves as essential elements to the operation of the universe. And Rosh Hashanah only happens because it's partnered with Yom Kippur. And you know what Yom Kippur means? Yom Kippur means personal responsibility for our behavior between ourselves, our fellow people, ourselves, and God. So Rosh Hashanah, which is the birthday of the entire universe, makes sense because you and I are willing to accept the moral and spiritual responsibility of monitoring our behavior. That's countdown. We have a week to start getting it right for the next year. This week, we're starting to walk across the threshold. And that metaphor is in my mind because of tomorrow's Torah reading. And it begins with a word that stands out. The word is nitzavim, which means stand. Moses is talking to the people of Israel and he says, you're standing up. Get ready. You're moving forward. And so it occurs to me, how often do I talk with you about what we Jews are supposed to stand for? What are we supposed to stand for? And I use that word intentionally because Moses' word of nitzavim, stand up, is echoing across thousands of years, and it's in my ear, and we're a week away from our countdown of starting the entire universe afresh based upon our behavior and our responsibility. How do I summarize what it means for us to stand up for something in just a few minutes? So much to consider. And so I cheat. And I quote a midrash, which comes from the Talmud. And evidently there are other people who've been asking the same question. What do we stand for? How will we summarize certain teachings and certain expectations and certain needs? And so there's one rabbi, his name is Simlai, and he says, you know what? Remember that there are 613 mitzvot. And as you know, there are 365 thou shalt nots corresponding to the days of the year, and 248 thou shalts corresponding to the body parts. Doctors, I don't know if there are 248 body parts or not, but it's a good number. 206 bones plus organs, right? So we'll say 248. So Rabbi Simlai is saying your behavior reflects makeup of time and your makeup of who you are within your own anatomy. How do you apply your own body to every day of your life? That's what it means to stand up. And then we jump fast forward. King David, as you know, was a musician and a poet, and he wrote many psalms, and they're gorgeous. And one psalm stands out. It's Psalm number 15, and I'm not going to read all of it because it's too long, but the gist is that David says there are 11 things that we really need to do. And some of them include don't slander, don't do evil to your fellow man, don't argue against people. If you make a promise and you realize that later on it's to your own detriment, you have to keep your word anyway. Jewish people don't break promises, and so on. David says 11. Jumping forward, Isaiah says, nope, all you really need are 6 principles. And that's what you and I, as human beings, need to stand up. Walk righteously, speak uprightly, don't take bribes, don't give bribes, keep your ears from hearing evil speech, don't speak evil speech. And then Micah comes along and says, nope, only need to do 3 things. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. By the way, that should be familiar to us because that's the name of our synagogue. Do justice, love doing kindness, Ahavas Chesed, and walk humbly with your God. It's interesting. Every one of these presentations has something to do with walking. Whether it's the 248 and the 365, or whether it's the 11, or whether it's the 6, or whether it's the 3, every element of how are we supposed to stand up and move forward has something to do with walking. That becomes a chief metaphor for how you and I are to live our lives and to stand up. The name of our synagogue, which we talk about, is love kindness. But the next phrase is walk humbly with your God. Walking humbly with your God must be some element that's connected to loving kindness. Walking humbly. Perhaps that's the guarantee, you might say, the assurance that you and I have loved enough kindness. We end up walking humbly with our God. So here we are. We're about to walk into a brand new year, and we have all these different advices. One from Rabbi Simlai, one from David HaMelech, one from Yeshayahu Navi, one is from Micha Navi. Rabbi Steve is talking, love God, walk humbly. What's the right answer? How do we know what we need to do to stand up? And what emerges is that in every generation, in every community, in every need, there are different vocabularies, different encapsulations of what we're supposed to do to stand up, what we're supposed to stand up for. So how am I going to say what needs to be said without repeating myself and going into great detail? Again, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use a phrase that you know. We say, have a happy new year. One of the things that we need to do, one of the things we need to stand up for, is making the year ahead happy. And the other element is, when we dip apples into honey, and we dip challah into honey, what do we say to each other? Have a sweet new year. We need to make the year sweet. And again, I'm cheating because I'm familiar with the text. In the daily Amidah, there's a prayer that talks about the year. Many people aren't familiar with the daily Amidah. I say it every day, 3 times a day. And there's a phrase that calls out to God, speaking of time, make this year a blessed year. But what's interesting, in that little paragraph, it doesn't talk about apples and honey. It doesn't talk about make it a new year. It says, let there be enough food to grow. Make this be a blessed year. By being able to feed others, we make the year blessed. Feeding others, that kind of corresponds to apples and honey, challah and honey. Sustenance, ensuring that other people have sustenance. Perhaps that's the way to go this year, to make it a stand-up year. May we find our own ways for when we stand up. May this be a blessed year. May we all be safe. May we all have peace. Amen. We rise for the Aleinu. The Aleinu sound on page number 56. Aleinu l'shabeach Adon hakol, latet gdula liotzer breshit, shelo asanuk goyeh ha'aratzot, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרה בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, ויודעת היום ושבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא אלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו echad. Mourner's Kaddish is on page number 58. And on this Shabbat, we remember with great love Pesha Rips, Ann Sussman, Belle Gutel, Chaim Gert, Gertrude Rips, Harry Schreibman, Mordechai Zerimba. That was Mr. Zerimba's child who was murdered by those disgusting, wicked animals. Mr. Zerimba had 3 children, and they were all destroyed. And then later in a DP camp, he met and married his wife, Kayla, whom we knew as Mrs. Zerimba, but he had lost his first wife prior. Mordechai Zerimba. Pauline Marcus, Peter Strinsky, Rosalie Rosenthal, Samuel Sass, Susan Perlman, Theodore Impastato, Charles Weber, Les Kramer, Rose Schwartz, Donna Smith, Tema Silberman. Are there any other names to mention this evening? Perhaps people at home have a name to share as well, and they're invited to stand at home. Kaddish on page 58. May I stand next to you? Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabo, Be'olma, Divra, Chirute, V'yamlich Malchute, B'chayechon, V'yomechon, V'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala V'zman Kariv, V'yimaru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabo, Mefarach, Le'olam Malomei Olmaya, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar, V'yitdaleh, V'yithalal, Shmei Tekudesha, Brechu, La'ela, Min Kol, Berchata, V'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata ta'amiran ba'alma v'miru. Amen. Hey, Shlama, Rabba, Min, Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'miru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'miru. Amen. There's a specific psalm recited this season of the year. It's on page 59. On page 59. And here on page 59, just the upper first third of the page, you might say. It's a little 3 or 4 black stanzas of black ink, and then the one song in the red transliteration, and it's Achat Shalti. This is recited every year, beginning a month prior to Rosh Hashanah and on through Yom Kippur and into part of Sukkot. Adonai is my light and my help, whom shall I fear? Adonai is the stronghold of my life, whom shall I dread? When evil people assail me to devour my flesh, my enemies and those who besiege me, it is they who stumble and fall. Should an armed camp be arrayed against me, my heart would show no fear. If they were to go to war against me, of this I would be sure. One thing I ask of Adonai, this is what I seek, to dwell in the house of God all the days of my life, to behold God's peacefulness, and to pray in God's sanctuary. Achat sha'alti meit Adonai uta'avakish. Achat sha'alti meit Adonai uta'avakish. Shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai. Lachazot b'noam Adonai, ulavaker b'hechalo. Lachazot b'noam Adonai, ulavaker b'hechalo. That's our prayer. May we know that we're not alone, and that we're welcomed into God's own dwelling place. And may this year be a good and sweet year. Shabbat shalom. Let's make Kiddush and Amotzi.